I thought it couldn't get any worse. The government couldn't possibly be more negligent. I was wrong. Over the last few weeks, Hurricanes Helene and Milton took on the southern US by force, causing together around $50 billion in damages, killing hundreds of people, displacing thousands, and cutting power to millions between North Carolina and Florida. Lucky for them, they live under the extremely rich US government, who has allocated the GDP of a small country's worth of funds to disaster relief. While that may be true, it appears that FEMA may be another agency filled with useless bureaucracy.
The shift that we're seeing right now is a shift in emergency management from utilitarian principles where everything is designed for the greatest good for the greatest amount of people to disaster equity. But we have to do more.
If you have no clue what the heck disaster equity is, here it is from FEMA's own Equity Action Plan. Equity is the consistent and systematic, fair, just, and impartial treatment of all individuals. That's a good start. Makes sense. What's wrong with that? Including individuals who belong to underserved communities of color, sex, sexual orientation, and gender identity, members of the LGBTQ+ community, persons with limited English proficiency, systematically denied a full opportunity to participate in aspects of economic, social, and civic life. You might ask, why did they specifically mention supporting everyone but straight, white, and Asian people? Does this mean they'd give aid preferably to some people than others? Isn't that discriminatory? Those are certainly interesting questions, but let's get back to the main topic. You see, FEMA's money is really split between two disasters. One is natural disasters, the other is border disasters. The current administration claims that no FEMA money goes to migrants, but this is blatantly false.
No, Biden did not take FEMA relief money to use on migrants. Funding is also available through FEMA's Emergency Food and Shelter Program to eligible local governments and non-for-profit organizations upon request to support humanitarian relief for migrants.
The good news is that plenty of money is still allocated towards disaster relief, but it doesn't matter, because most of the money spent towards the disasters isn't actually making it to those in need. There are hundreds of examples reported by locals about the ineptitude and regulatory nightmare that has been FEMA's involvement. A woman in Bakersville, North Carolina, whose home was washed away, she has been volunteering at a local school for the last 9 days and no FEMA presence. Locals cleared all the roads and organized all the resources. The feds cutting off all aid flights. A woman and her neighbor lack food, and the neighbor had a tree fall on her house, but they were rejected for aid. Dear America documented their journey helping out in North Carolina. They met with a pilot flying aid in and out.
But the real problem that we're running into is we're having to call airports ahead of time to coordinate to make sure that FEMA's not there trying to seize supplies.
Why are you having to avoid FEMA? What's going on?
They're confiscating supplies. They have roadblocks set up in certain places and at certain airports where FEMA will come in, shut down the airport, and say no more landing, no more supplies come in. We've had helicopters and airplanes get turned around, and we've had FEMA agents show up and try to take supplies.
They also met with the Assistant Fire Chief of Pensacola, Bradley Boone.
So I'm just wondering if the supplies are still coming in by helicopter, or
We are getting some,
Okay,
yeah.
great.
It's slowed down a lot,
yeah.
but we're still getting some.
How about FEMA representation? Has anybody been there?
I've not seen it, so. I've not seen it, so.
Famous radio host Glenn Beck even paid a visit to North Carolina.
I've seen one FEMA truck. I just interviewed them. They arrived last night. I said to them, "What are you doing here?" They were all sitting at a card table with one computer. And they said, "Well, we need to be where the people are." And I thought, well, the people aren't here. And we're getting them registered so they can sign up for government aid. It is absolutely ridiculous what the federal government is doing.
Very little action from the federal government and a lot of organized action.
What I'm saying is no action from the federal government. When FEMA does arrive, is a semi-truck driver who had been pulled over by FEMA, and they took his food off his truck because they know better. FEMA trying to shut down this the Hilo field because the FAA isn't involved. If you had planes down here and you had helicopters yourself and you were rescuing them, then fine, we'd shut this down. But you're not here. Is the government going to allow those people to move back and build their homes? Not according to FEMA's own mission plan, no.
This incident isn't isolated to the last two hurricanes either, as Ryan Tyre illustrates in his story of Hurricane Irma back in 2017. When Irma hit the Florida Keys, they tried to bring supplies, but the feds shut down the highway and wouldn't let them pass. They saw FEMA wasn't working when it was dark and went around the blockades with jet skis and boats. Once they arrived, the homeowners were elated to have them, explaining that FEMA had set up command but wasn't helping whatsoever, but instead told people to stay in their homes, despite the fact that they were 5 days out with no help. The homeowner goes on to explain that he and his neighbors thought their country had abandoned them, and insisted that Ryan and his team go on to the only form of communication they had, the local radio station, and alert the locals that help was on the way. On a separate aid mission to Boot Key, Ryan got several semi-trucks worth of supplies, but were refused by FEMA because the donations were not on the, quote, preferred vendors list. He went on to learn that the preferred vendors get giant kickbacks from the government. I recommend reading the whole story yourself. It has now been a month since Ryan posted this, and he is still giving aid in North Carolina. Thankfully, the government decided to set the record straight on how much aid they're actually providing. All this does, however, is prove how inefficient government spending can get. Some may call all of this anti-FEMA talk a conspiracy, but it's just as much a conspiracy theory as Kamala replacing Biden last minute. The unfortunate reality is we can't really afford to support our citizens in need. After all, we have a family to feed. This is Isaac Kronz. I'll see you in the next one.